afternoon. I'll try not to go too long to keep you from their coffee. I'm going to try and pull out some of the work and how we've pulled it together, particularly in one of the later work packages, in terms of what results from GenTORE might mean in terms of breeding for greenhouse gas mitigation. It's not that bad. I need them. We're looking here at some of the major drivers we're seeing over the next decade for ruminant production around the globe. GenTORE is a European project, but obviously, particularly from a genetics point of view, there could be influences beyond the borders of Europe. But also there could be lessons in terms of technological developments and implementations of new breeding goals and tools to support those for developing worlds. So this just came out last week, which are the sort of agricultural outlook from the OECD FAO annual publication. And we can see here, looking at both aspects of cattle production in terms of meat as well as dairy, and we can see that over the next decade, there is still going to be a projected growth of consumption and production of all meat classes around the globe, but over 90% of that production and consumption is going to come from lower middle income countries. Overall, beef production, albeit tiny, is up across, production is up around the globe, but consumption is down in the EU. And if we look at dairy, we can see similar increases in demand for these products, both based on population and affluence growth, particularly in terms of in India and Pakistan. And we can see when we're mapping, and the OECD have mapped these out, that we have greater efficiency of milk production, sustaining the yield and production increases. So what does this mean in terms of greenhouse gases? Are we already de facto breeding for greenhouse gas mitigation? And the answer is just a tiny bit. If we're looking here at the projections from the FAO across, this is just pulling out the beef and veal trajectories, we can still see a slight decline. We can see a blip projected as an outcome of the Ukrainian crises on feed and how that feeds into beef. But basically over the next 10 years, a relatively flat curve in what might be a projection of what breeding is doing for emissions intensity already. Important to note, though, here also is the yield gaps, and how this might feed into not just breeding in Europe, but how we inform breeding around the globe. And we see similarly, slightly differently presented, and I couldn't recalculate it as nicely into emissions intensity from the data, the raw data. Again, similar levels of yield gap, looking at the black dots between our different regions of the world, and these do not match where that production is going to happen. So we do know, and we can see that classical breeding and what we've been doing for the past, particularly since the Second World War, has led to, particularly in the EU, meat and milk production that is efficient, but that there is still some potential for improvement. And so how do we achieve that last efficiency envelope? But also we need to, and particularly looking at those yield gaps and the differences in those systems and the genetics, what can we do about current and future systems challenges in terms of achieving that? And that's the resilience part of GenTORE. So I won't go into this, but I'll pick out some of how GenTORE is addressing these. We're looking at how to improve animal production efficiency as well as lifetime efficiency, and I'll go through how our results have impacted on those two and potentially could inform breeding for mitigation, as well as looking for the overall system. And I won't go into so much about that, and I'll because there's talks later in the main conference that will do that. And just some very initial thoughts about, well, okay, if we breed for mitigation, particularly focusing on either feed efficiency, production efficiency, or lifetime efficiency, what does that mean to the other side of that climate coin in terms of resilience and being able to cope with our future production scenarios? So, and just because I know Nick is worried about the time, so our solution is broader breeding goals to design for the future. Thank you. Is that enough, Nick, or do you want more? Okay. Right. Okay. So what do we mean by broader breeding goals? In the context of GenTORE, we've actually not, I think on other programs, a lot of the efficiency work is focused very much on converting feed into product, be it milk or meat, and usually as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So I'm going to try and pull out two sides, a bit of beef and a bit of dairy, unusually for in some of these talks. The broader breeding goal is looking at that production efficiency, but also how do we get the animal on the ground and how do we supply future animals? And then how efficiently does it convert into product at all parts of the supply chain? So in the beef context, and of course you could complicate this, which is why I asked Mogens the question about what's happening on the dairy herd if the dairy herd genetics are feeding into this. And this all factors in. Each of these traits drive not only the emissions that might originate from the animal itself, but also what are the demands for other parts of the system, be it in terms of the types and volumes of feed, how that feed is processed and presented, and how those animals are housed, managed, and moved off farm. So I'll just go through some headlines, looking at adding improved production efficiency, and we have added to this knowledge as well as, and I haven't been able to contextualize all of these in terms of moving away from just simple output efficiency through to genetics of lifetime efficiency. Building on, so what we've done is taken some of the results and some of the headline results, particularly from Work Package 2, but also Work Package 6, and some of those have been presented. And that's, of course, naming projects. So Work Package 6 is very much about bringing this together in what does this mean for our systems. We're looking here at a broader breeding goal, and this is based on the UK breeding goal, so we've kind of contextualised it in something that we have a lot of information on, in terms of our milk and production traits. This is a goal that's slightly, about maybe 2 years out of date, but allowed us to help look what does lifetime efficiency mean for this. So looking at just the economics of production that drives our breeding goal, it is just over 55% and 43% on fitness traits. We've developed in the UK ways of including broader environmental impact by using IPCC methodologies and environmental economics methodologies to enhance our economic values using what is the shadow price of carbon. And we can do that for those traits in the breeding goal. However, if we just use the classical IPCC model, you can see there's a slightly higher weighting on production than we had with just the economics, just because of that, the impact of milk and the feed that drives it in the classical IPCC framework. This has impact comparing what my breeding goals look like with those of various improvements, and we'll just focus on the bottom line there because we don't have time to go through that all. In terms of, if we focus just on optimising for economic return, we can see that there's just over £7 GBP, Great British pounds, economic gain per cow per year, and 33.5 kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent per cow. Now, if you remember back a few slides, that's actually quite a substantial amount of carbon saving within the dairy cow. I knew I'd miss one of the tabs. And if we look at just the greenhouse gases, what we can see is a far lower economic return, because actually what that goal is pushing us is milk production based on the IPCC calculation. So we achieve quite a substantially larger amount of GHG saving, but a halved amount of environmental. So what GenTORE has shown us through, and this is just one example of the papers that have looked at this, is looking at the efficiency within and across the production lifetime and cycles therein is really, really important. So, this has already been outlined. So if we look at enhancing and using the same environmental economics to estimate weighting for lifetime efficiency, so incorporating the feed efficiency, but also those wasted days across productive life cycles. What we see is a weight that is slightly higher than we have for the traditional lifespan weight in terms of environmental impact. And this kind of redresses some of that balance between that we saw when we just added the traditional ways of IPCC in our environmental goal. So rebalancing it to be less on production for the first time in these three scenarios and more. Sorry, that should be 52. I didn't type that properly. Apologies, no, that's the wrong way around. 10 minutes, okay. I'm nearly finished actually. So if we look at what does that mean in terms of lifetime efficiency, again, just focusing on the last line, what we see is a slightly lower economic return than the economically optimized goal and an interim on GHG emissions. But also, just to highlight, what we see also is one of the better outcomes for our fitness traits in this scenario, showing that looking at that lifetime efficiency rather than short-time production efficiency helps have that longer-term effect on broader fitness. So that includes some of that. The lifetime efficiency, we've already discussed some of those in earlier talks, particularly Moan's talk about genetics and genomics for crossbred and efficiency. So we've been doing some work, that's not the slide I'd hoped, apologies. We've been doing some work on this in the UK, and Harriet's been analysing these data in terms of its climate resilience. And here we're looking at that female fertility side, so that breeding cycle aspects. And what we can see is, without going into all the detail, nearly just over 2 month difference in terms of an interquartile range between our top and bottom bulls in the UK for age at first calving, which has benefits across, and in a similar way to how we calculated for dairy, of a value of 95 kilograms of carbon dioxide per cow equivalent per annum and nearly 50 pounds per cow calving. So if we pop all these into a range of tools in terms of a broader breeding goal, so building on what we currently have in the UK, by including production efficiency, we can improve both our economic and our greenhouse gas mitigation. And similarly, we can improve those as we look at broader efficiency, be it for fertility and feed for efficiency. And genomic information helps to achieve that further. I'm going to skip past that because that just puts that all in a bar chart, looking at beef and dairy together. What I wanted to just highlight, and we're just pulling together the final details of this, it's a little bit hot off the press. So Harriet showed some results earlier about what the differences might be in terms of production under climate challenges, and Jay Burns will be talking on Thursday afternoon, I think, thanks, not as well as Moan's, about how this might play out in terms of a dairy breeding scenario. So if we look at a slightly simpler version than Jay's, if we put those climate limitations on those future genetic improvement trajectories, what we may have is animals that mightn't be able to cope or achieve the genetic improvement potential. And this has impact in terms of looking at the limits to the production efficiency in terms of both economic and environmental efficiency. But just wanted to highlight that breeding limitation, so losing a calf or being 2 or 3 months later calving for the first time or not being able to get back in calf have a far bigger effect if some of the climate projections, some climate impacts actually occur. Okay. So I just wanted to highlight that climate resilience, we can't ignore it by just even looking for lifetime efficiency and incorporating that in a broader breeding goal. Still, those future climates, even within a hardy UK breed, might be limiting. So we need to make sure that we don't just go down efficiency only and not think about a strategy about how those future systems might supply and deliver that efficiency. So just to finish up on GenTORE and GHG emissions mitigation, we have shown our tools will mitigate our greenhouse gases, already are, and with that we have enhanced them further with some of the tools that have already been developed, and that we need to make sure that we're looking and continue to look at those trade-offs within an animal, within a system, but also within a system over time to ensure that we're not working outside the limits of our future climate scenarios. Thank you. I don't know what happened. Thanks.
Thank you, Eileen. So we have time for some questions.
I can't see now.
Yeah, hello. It's in relation to the breeding goal. I saw that you put more weight on milk. Is this ND-corrected milk and then less weight on fat, or is it? Because if it's just on the water part of milk, I do not understand why you are doing it. So is it
negative weight on milk because it is the water.
So you
weight
put
is on the solids.
you put more weights on the water part.
No, it's negative economic weight.
It's some more negative weight.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's a positive weight on fat and protein. Sorry,
Okay.
microphone. Sorry, Nick. Yeah. So it's effectively milk solids. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Thanks, Nick. Mr. Chagunda here from the University of Hohenheim in Germany. I just wanted to kind of comment on your first comment indicating that the results produced in this project may not just be European-based. I actually would want to say, to kind of underline that, knowing that I'm doing quite a lot of work in the tropics and subtropics, the global south. Climate change is already happening there. And quite a lot of farmers are already really finding the impact of climate change. So the work that GenTORE has been doing in producing knowledge, skills, and tools will actually be very helpful even to the global south. So I just wanted to underline that actually that's a very true statement. But my question then is on the data from FAO that you just highlighted. The contribution of beef in greenhouse gases, you said was very minimal. But then you actually cited two countries, India and Pakistan. Is it because actually traditionally in those countries, beef is not the major produce they get from cattle? Because of religious reasons, actually they get more milk. So would we say that actually the numbers of cattle in that area still produce greenhouse gases, but actually that's accounted for the dairy, not the beef? All right, okay.
But there is a yield gap of, I think it was about 4 or 5 times in those countries. There grows obviously in the global north, if you want to call it that.
Yep.
So there's still information that we need to figure out. But I think it's probably more about the tools and how to not get yourself into the same mess that we got into.
Exactly, because even Africa is projected to be consuming and producing a lot more in the next 20, 30 years. So these tools are actually very useful. So thanks.